Students. This is the beginning of Unit 2, which is all about Africa and Asia in the year 1500. So, 500 years ago. And we're going to be talking about governments and how they gain and maintain power. And we're going to be looking at examples from Africa and Asia in around the year 1500. And we're going to start off today by talking about Islamic empires. So we call them Islamic empires because the people who lived there believed in the religion Islam, right? And the main two examples we're going to use are the Ottoman Empire, which you can see here is located in the Middle East, North Africa, and Southeast Europe. It's where the modern-day country of Turkey is located, and also the modern-day country of Greece, and all the Middle Eastern countries as well. And then the Mughal Empire, which is an Islamic empire that controlled most of India during this time period. Those are the two examples that we're going to talk about. But first we need to say, what's an empire? And we're going to talk about empires a lot in this class. An empire is a state that controls a territory with diverse subject peoples. So first off, a state means government. I think I said this in class probably, but when I say state in this class, I'm usually not talking about Texas or Florida or whatever. I'm talking about a government, like the state. Okay, so I'm highlighting some words here. Controls. So controls means makes people do stuff. So they control a territory with diverse groups of people. So many different kinds of people live in this territory, and they're subject. And in this sentence, the word subject means they got to do what you say. A state that controls a territory with diverse subject peoples. So that means we have a government that controls a lot of different kinds of people and makes sure that they do what the government says. All right, how do they do that? So the Ottoman Empire and the Mughal Empire were both, sometimes they get called gunpowder empires. And the reason why is because gunpowder was relatively new technology during this time period. Like having a musket that fired a bullet out of a gun, that was the new thing. Having cannons that could fire cannonballs into buildings or ships, that was new technology. And so the Ottomans and the Mughals were able to take over large territory because they had this new technology and they had armies that had rifles and they had cannons. Usually they would use their cannons and their rifles and they also had swords too, to take over places that were really important for trade. So the Ottomans took over the city of Constantinople because Constantinople is a center for trade. And this is a painting of the fall of Constantinople. Constantinople had been a Christian city going back to the ancient Roman Empire. And as the Islamic world grew and Islam spread, these group of people called the Turks got closer and closer to Constantinople and started taking more and more land away from the people, from the empire that ran out of Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire. And in 1453, they eventually were able to finally take over Constantinople using these massive cannons. Some of the cannons were so big that you could put a person inside of them. The Mughals similarly took over India, and they took over India and the parts of India that they took over because it is an important center for Indian Ocean trade, because people from Africa and the Middle East and Southeast Asia and China all come to India to buy and sell things. So if you can control India, then you're going to make a lot of money off of trade. So one strategy for running your empire is to control trade so you make lots of money. Oh, look, it's the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb. What's he got to say? Thank you, Aurangzeb. That's very meaningful. All right, here's another strategy for running an empire. You got to have bureaucrats. Now, what's a bureaucrat? A bureaucrat is like an office worker, somebody who does the paperwork. And so a lot of times today in modern America, people talk about bureaucrats as being pointless or people who don't do anything important because they just work with papers. But bureaucrats actually do a lot of work and they make a government run. And so you got to have a system for coming up with bureaucrats. So how did the Ottomans do this? They had a system called the Devshirme system. That's how you pronounce that word, Devshirme. I'm not going to be mad at you if you pronounce it wrong, but I will probably tell you to say Devshirme. Here you can see at the bottom of this picture some little boys in red, and they have been kidnapped. They are Christian kids from Europe, and they have been kidnapped from their families and brought to the Ottoman Empire. In Islam, you are not allowed to enslave another Muslim, but you can enslave people who don't believe in Islam yet. So these Christian boys were captured in Southeast Europe and brought to the Ottoman Empire, and then they were treated really well. Like they were slaves, but they were like given high status jobs. They were sent to schools where they became incredibly well educated, and they would go on to become the government officials that ran the Ottoman Empire. Crazy. Some of these, the Devshirme system also didn't just create bureaucrats, they also created janissaries, who were the elite soldiers that fought for the Ottoman Empire. Here is a historical image of janissaries, but I just don't feel like it really does them justice. Like janissaries were really cool, like badass warriors. So here's a representation from the popular video game Assassin's Creed. Doesn't that look cooler? Yes, it does. All right. Oh God. Mr. Everton went crazy with the speech bubbles today, y'all. So the Mughals had their own kind of bureaucrats. These guys were called zamindars. And a zamindar is somebody who controls territory in India. They've got their own little kingdom. And instead of taking them over, the Mughals are like, you can keep your land as long as you give us a cut of your taxes. So a Mughal zamindar basically like says like, they know they can't defeat the Mughals. So they're like, okay, I'm not going to fight. I'm going to do what you say. I'm going to pledge my allegiance to you, and I'm going to give you a cut of the money that I get taxing my people. So those were bureaucrats for the Mughal Empire. All right. He had to do it to him. All right. What's another way that you can run an empire? Well, monumental architecture. That means building a big, impressive building. Like the United States, this is the U.S. Capitol building where Congress meets. It's a large, impressive-looking building. Like when you see that, you're like, darn, they must be doing something important in there. Well, the Ottomans had monumental architecture too. This is called the Hagia Sophia, and it had been a Greek Orthodox cathedral, so a Christian cathedral for a really long time. But when the Muslims took over Constantinople and renamed it Istanbul, they turned the Hagia Sophia into a Muslim mosque. A mosque is a place where Muslims go to pray and have, worship services. Like Christians go to church, Muslims go to mosque. Okay. So this is the Hagia Sophia, a really impressive mosque in Istanbul. And this is the Taj Mahal, which is an example of monumental architecture that was built by the Mughals. This is literally, if you Google monumental architecture, this is the picture that comes up. The Taj Mahal is not a mosque. It looks kind of like a mosque, right? It's got the domes, it's got the minaret-looking towers in the corners, but this is actually a mausoleum, which is a tomb. The emperor of the Mughal Empire, his wife died, and he was pretty broken up about it. So he decided to build the Taj Mahal. Relationship goals. Okay, so here's another strategy. Islamic empires used religion in order to create stability. This man with this amazing hat is Suleiman the Magnificent. And Suleiman the Magnificent was the Sultan, which is the word that they used to describe the emperor of the Ottoman Empire. He was the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. But he was also claiming to be the Caliph. And in Islam, the Caliph is a successor to Prophet Muhammad. So like nobody will ever be a prophet again in Islam, but there were caliphs, which were, religious leaders of the Muslim world. So even though he's the ruler of a country, he's saying all the Muslims in the world, I'm their leader. And that worked. Like people hear that he's the leader of the Muslim world, and so a lot of Muslims are going to do what he says. At the same time, the Ottomans were incredibly tolerant of non-Muslims, right? So that means they didn't mess with them. They allowed them to live in their community. They allowed them to follow their own religious rules. They had a special name, dhimmi, which they used to describe Christians and Jews. Because Muslims, Christians, and Jews are all monotheistic. They all believe in only one God, and it's pretty much different versions of the same God. So dhimmi is people of the book, is what that means. It means like the Christians and the Jews believe in the same general ideas as the Muslims, and so they recognize that, and they're like, oh, well, they don't, they believe in a very similar religion to us, so we're going to give them special status. And then finally, this guy, this guy, his name is Akbar the Great. He was a Mughal emperor, and he was incredibly tolerant of non-Muslims. This is really important because the Mughals were Muslim, but India is 80% Hindu. Hindu is a different religion, right? And so like most people in India are Hindu, but then there's this minority of Muslims who live there. And so Akbar the Great had a policy of being incredibly tolerant of Hindus. There were other Muslims who were like, we're going to tear down the Hindu temples and like desecrate their statues. And Akbar was like, no, 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 no. Live and let live. Let them have their temples. Don't mess with them. And that got a lot of Hindus to be like, okay, I'm going to do what this Muslim guy says because he's at least not messing with me. Later, as the Mughal Empire started to go down and stop being quite so successful, some other emperors were not quite so tolerant, and some historians have tried to say that that's the reason why one of the big reasons why the Mughal Empire fell, because they stopped being so tolerant of Hindus. So I know that was a lot of information, but this is the place where you get to summarize. How did Islamic empires maintain power? What were some of the strategies they used? We want to get, I want to point out to you, it wasn't just about military force. They did other things too. So what were some of the other things they did? I'll see you next time.